Sir, your mic is off.
Yes, respected Executive Director Father Jacob Udusheril, Assistant Executive Director Father Sajad Joseph Padayatil, our Principal Professor Dr. M.L. Joseph, our resource person Professor Dr. Richard Pettinger, faculty members and my dear students. A very good afternoon to all. The title of today's webinar is Material Changes in Organizational Behavior in the Pandemic and Post-Pandemic World. A very relevant topic in this period indeed. You know, organizational behavior is the study and application of knowledge about how people act within organizations. Organization behavior is the study of learning how to predict human behavior. It helps the managers to understand the basis of motivation and what he does to motivate his subordinates. It helps to maintain cordial industrial relationship to increase overall productivity. Our resource person, Professor Richard, will explain in detail about the topic. Let me come to my duty. I welcome our respected principal, Dr. M.L. Joseph, who is the motivational factor behind the program. Sir. And Dr. Richard Pettinger is a professor of management education at the University College London, UCL, where he was the founder and creator of the undergraduate and graduate programs in information management for business in the UCL School of Management. So he is the author of overall 50 books and numerous papers on all parts of the subject of management. I warmly welcoming our resource person, Professor Richard, to this webinar. I also welcome my colleagues and the coordinators of this program, Professor Joe Peter and Mrs. Manasa Sunny, to this webinar. I welcome my dear students, the most beneficiaries of the program, to the webinar. Once again, on behalf of the Department of Management, I welcome one and all to this webinar. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, sir. We are happy to with us our respected principal, Professor Dr. M.L. Joseph, who has consistently have been the pillar of strength and source of motivation for all the students and faculties of BMCCA. I invite you, sir, for the inaugural address.
Thank you, Professor Manasa. Respected Professor Richard Pettinger, Professor of Management Education, University College of London. Respected Executive Director, Reverend Father Jacob Puducherry, Assistant Executive Director, Father Sajal, Professor Raj Mohan, dear faculty members and my dearest students. In fact, we are very lucky to have a resource person like Professor Richard Pettinger, a world-renowned professor in the field of management studies, to interact with us today about a very important topic like the material changes in the organizational sector during the pandemic as well as in the post-pandemic time. Bharat Mata College wholeheartedly places on record our sense of gratitude to Professor Richard Pettinger and his great institution for their generosity towards our institution by interacting with our students and staff. We have a habit of organizing international seminars and workshops in different subjects for the benefit of our students. So I'm not enlarging and extending my words. With your support, I declare this seminar open.
Okay, very many thanks to everybody. Is it my turn? Ladies and gentlemen, can you all...
Yes, it's audible, sir. Audible.
Right.
Sir.
Okay. Then let me start. Do we have any way of sharing? There is a PowerPoint presentation for my talk anyway, which I will send over to Mr. Anthony directly after we have finished. And so I am hereby, yes, I was asked to talk for about 50 minutes and then to take some questions and answers at the end. So, you know, it's a huge pleasure for me to be with you. It is a very great honor for me to be with you. Thank you so much indeed for the generous welcome. And I hope that as a result of this talk, it will help you to understand some of the things that we've been looking at so that when we do come out of the pandemic, we have a world that we can all exist in as well as be successful and effective in. I've called the talk Material Changes in Organisational Behaviour in the Pandemic and Post-Pandemic World, and that's the approach that we'll take. What I'll do is do a bit of an introduction, then go through just the realm of organisational behaviour, and then there are about 10 things that I would run through as the substance of the talk. So that's the plan, and I hope that that's going to work for everybody. And as I say, it is a huge, great pleasure to be asked along. It's a very great honour to have been asked along, and very great thank yous to Mr. Anthony and to the principals for having me along. Yeah, you know, where does all this come from? Well, as everybody very kindly said in the introductions, I'm Professor of Management Education at University College London. My majors are in organisational behaviour and the technology and telecommunications and IT infrastructure that we all have to work with these days. And the social and behavioural developments during and because of the COVID crisis are things that we're all studying and that you're all aware of, because the world has changed since March last year, and whatever we go back to, we're never going to go back to the way that things were. And that's a huge challenge for people in managerial positions, leadership positions. It is also something that, as we'll make clear throughout the talk, an awful lot of companies and organisations do not do particularly well. An awful lot of companies and organisations take the view that this is purely an economic approach, purely a business-driven products and services sales approach. And if ever that was true in the past, none of it is true now. So what we look at, therefore, is how to define and develop effective organisational behaviour in the pandemic world and the major and key developments in their impacts. And what we need to look at is the way in which we want business to be in the future, of course, and the way that we want organisations to be, the purposes that they serve, and everything else. At the centre of that comes organisational behaviour, OB, a direct reflection of the core of the human proposition and the value of the organisation. Always to remember that in general terms, the human part of the organisation makes up the return on investment on about 65% of working capital. And only in a very few cases and instances is that untrue. Only in things like chemical engineering and biochemical technology and things like that does that drop below about 50%. So you're looking at all times at a major investment in the major commitment to what represents about 2/3 of your financial commitment. It is also a fundamental gap in leadership and management knowledge and expertise. All of us who work in universities and all of us who study in universities, of course, know that that is vitally important. Companies and organizations and people in industry still take the view that, oh no, you can do what you like with the staff. It does not work like that. And as we have seen throughout the pandemic, the companies and organizations that have managed to change and develop have been those that have been said, yes, we can make our people work in different ways, and our people are committed to working in different ways so that when time comes along and things do get back to a little bit like something that is normal, we have got a workforce that is motivated, we have got a company that has got strong and inclusive culture, as we'll see in a few minutes, and all of those things remain in place in the new world. The foundations of organisational behaviour, as I've just said just now, we're all familiar with, and it's beyond the scope of this talk, and I won't belabor it anyway. But it's the things about fundamentally that organisational leadership is a human activity and based on integrating itself with what organisational behaviour is. Perceptions, attitudes, values and beliefs, everything that we hold dear, communication as the oil that drives all organisations, culture and cultural drives and pressures and the ways in which we do things in different parts of the world, individual and collective behaviour, the ways in which we do things according to the people that we work with, the people that we co-work with, the patterns of supervision and everything else that we've got, motivation and incentives, which is a major area of concern for the future of the pandemic world, and I'll say much more about that in a little while. Individual and collective development that we all seek and espouse, and so here we all are here and now. Identity and alienation and the ability to keep people engaged at all times during the course of their work and their working life, and the psychological contract that goes with that. Ethics and standards, the things that we will and won't do, and the ways in which we conduct ourselves and behave ourselves collectively. The need for teams and groups to be effective in all situations, and again, that is a major challenge for the present and the future. The reporting relationships that we all have, and the conflict and consensus and engagement and everything else that goes with all of that. All of that is a fundamental basis that all organisation leaders and managers need to know and be aware of. As I said just earlier, if this is about managing 65% of your working capital, then it is that you have to look at. If this is about, we can all look after systems and processes, we need to know how people actually behave in real situations, in real organisations, and we need to know how that is going to work out into the pandemic. Other things to look at, of course, is the age and the history and the traditions of the organisation in which you work, the physical locations, what the buildings look like. Are there loads of corridors? Are there loads of lifts? Are there loads of open spaces? Or does everybody have their own workstation? Whatsoever it is. The nature of organisation technology and the specific mixes of expertise that are employed to make sure that that technology works, and the collective and individual norms and patterns of conduct and behaviour. In all cases, we have to be able to design that. If you do not design it, then those patterns of behavior will emerge as the result of the age and the history of how things have been always done. And you need to make sure and know and understand that all of those things, you need to be able to influence, and you need to be able to use business processes and organization processes to influence and design and develop them at all times. And you have to look at the wider environment in which the organizations work. Do they work in rich areas? Do they work in poor areas? Do they work in urban areas? Do they work in rural areas? And what are the related patterns of behavior that go with that? What are the related patterns of attitude that go with that? Are you seen as a good organization? Are you seen as a great organization? You ideally want the latter, of course. People's hours and patterns of work, people's hours and patterns of work inform the rest of their life. And so it's essential that you see it in that kind of a context. I should say at this point that I live in rural parts of England, and I commute to central London when we have to. In the last 18 months, I've been into the office once. Otherwise, work has gone on online. Now, on the one hand, that's great. On the other hand, me and the other 12,000 staff at University College London, 42,000 students at University College London, have all had to shift our hours and patterns of work. So it has been for everybody in every organisation in the world. What this has brought into sharp focus is the content of communication, the nature of meetings and events, and the frequency of staff contact with each other. The guy that I share the office with in London, I have not seen him for 18 months. We caught up once or twice by Zoom or by Teams or by Google or something like that. It is the same with us all. We have to manage this emerging situation. Right. And then alongside all of that, you have, again, in individual cases and organizations, a leadership style, attitudes and values that have to be effective in the post-pandemic world. You have to look at the basics. What are you going to reward? What are you going to punish? Where are the sources and causes of conflict that are coming out, even as we all work online or mainly online? If we were meeting only infrequently rather than frequently, how does conflict manifest itself? How do relationships get changed? How does it affect collective and individual staff relations? What you have to do also is to make sure that behavior is effective. Patterns of behavior and relationships drive organizational performance. Patterns of relationships and behavior drive everything that we do. You cannot simply order people to work, and as time and motion studies have said in the past, if you try and do things on that basis, you will almost necessarily fail. So you've got to be able to create and recreate and develop and redevelop the behavior and relationships that drive you, whatever your environment, whatever your location. If these behaviors and relationships are weak or divided and divisive, then performance suffers. And that is always the fault of organizational leadership and management. So what you want is something that is positive and not negative, something that is cohesive and not divisive, and something that is strong and not weak, and something that is inclusive and founded on a fundamental egalitarianism as well as the nature of the work that is done, and something that is shared so that you create patterns of behavior that everyone follows and is willing to follow. This comes with your responsibilities as leader and manager. This is a fundamental part of your knowledge and expertise as a leader and manager. And all of these things become fundamental to whether or not you are going to be successful in the future. In this country, we've just had a very, very successful startup It was a company in the drinks industry that has now come to the forefront that actually they're almost bound to collapse because of the patterns of behavior. They spent so much time developing the market, the technology, that they failed to look after the staff. And now the staff are beginning to leave the company in their droves. So you've got a phenomenally successful and profitable company that failed to look at the patterns of behavior, that failed to get positive patterns of behavior, that failed to get shared attitudes, and that failed to found on a fundamental egalitarianism. So, where this brings us round to, at the end of the first part of the talk, is patterns of collective and individual conduct and behavior that deliver the return on investment, that deliver the performance standards and development, that deliver the respect and confidence and shared values and organizational harmony that you need and want, that deliver collective attachment and commitment, and that deliver collective and individual identity. This then becomes a vehicle for development and change. Okay, right, so that brings us to the end of the first part of the talk, and what I'll now do is to go through, as I say, 10 items that are of paramount importance as we seek to develop our knowledge and understanding of organizational behavior, our knowledge and understanding of everything that we are going to be doing in business and organizations into the future. The first is simply pandemic and post-pandemic changes. Hours and patterns of work have all changed and all shifted, and alongside that, the shift to what we call hybrid organizations. The shift to companies and organizations that people do not now turn up to on a daily basis. People now turning up when it is necessary to turn up, when it is desirable to turn up, and in the pandemic, when it is possible to turn up. And alongside that, the human technology interface has developed out of all recognition over the years. The human technology has developed out of all recognition. And what we used to do, what we used to wonder about doing, we now do by links, by technology, and so on. This has led to non-standard occupations, and I'll say a bit more about that in a few moments. And this has led also to people starting to create and recreate their own patterns of work, their own life patterns, their own life mixes. We've got people in major companies and organizations in London now creating their own spin-offs, their own startups, their own positions, their own development opportunities as the result of this move into non-standard occupations. Alongside that, organizational and occupational developments. Such professions as medicine have had to become technology-oriented and technology-driven. 18 months ago, if you wanted a doctor's appointment, you went to see the doctor, and the doctor would not consider seeing you any other way. Doctor would not consider seeing anybody other than face-to-face. None of that is possible now, and even the medical profession have begun to see the value and prospects of technology, and that's changed their organizations and behavior. We have to get used to the idea of social and occupational distancing and however that works. There's a factory just down the road from where I live, which has got one-way systems in place and masking and gel at every workstation, and every time somebody leaves the workstation is sterilized. All of those things have had to become integrated into the patterns of behavior within which we all work. The second of these pandemic and post-pandemic changes is individual and collective work-life balances. The impact of flexibility and hybrid working and hybrid organisations on domestic and non-work life. We've all had that, as I said just now. And this brings us round to social as well as economic demands and elements for organisations and their products and services. We've seen huge disruptions to what we used to consider as being global supply chains. And so you have to use something that you can source. And that's a seismic shift in attitude. That's a seismic shift. Oh yes, suddenly we've got to go back to our local providers, or suddenly we've got to go back to somebody who can get stuff to us in spite of the pandemic. Right? And these are social changes that are changing organizational behavior and leadership behavior because they have had to change. In the past, companies and organizations could manage and direct change in their own ways. Now, this is not possible. Now, you have to be able to take advantage of opportunities wheresoever and whensoever they occur. This in turn beggars a shift towards sustainability, and I'll say a little bit more about that in one of the other points. The third of the 10 pandemic and post-pandemic changes that I would draw your attention to are the actual and desired managerial approaches. Many managers will still say, I am not changing my attitude. I am not changing my approach. If my people are going to work from home, then I need to be able to monitor them. If my people are going to be able to work from home, my people need to be able to see what they're doing and make sure that they're not in bed or lazing outside on the terrace or whatsoever it may be. My people need to be able to say that they that my people are my workers are working. Right? This is counterproductive in all but very few sets of circumstances. Right? It is Big Brother watching you, which none of us like, and that's a social response. It is Big Brother, and that's none of us like. That is also a behavioural response, and something that, no, we value our privacy, even if we don't have as much as we necessarily think we have. So what you need and want and should be thinking is, how am I going to make this work in a online or hybrid situation? How am I going to make this work in a post-pandemic world? How am I going to make this world work so that I get the best out of people wherever they're working? If you've got an oppressive attitude, then you're not going to get the best out of them wherever they are working. In all of these things, the effects on productivity and output are always crucial, and never to forget that. This is about the 65% return on the return on investment on the 65% of your working capital. Those are the most important things to do. You are learning organizational behavior. You are learning to develop pandemic and post-pandemic behavior, organizational behavior, so that your company and organization remains effective, viable, profitable, and sustainable. Brings us round to the fourth of the 10 changes, where work is done. Where would you like it to be done? Is it going to be done at home? Not every home, of course, is suitable as a workstation. So are you going to hire premises at a hotel or at a business centre, or what? These become changes and choices that you have to learn. And as you ask people to work in hotels or business centres or from homes, you change again the dynamics, you change again the patterns of communication, you change the relationships, you change the reporting relationships. And how to supervise in these situations is a critical factor for the future. How to supervise in these situations, it is absolutely essential that you know and learn and understand the patterns of behaviour with which people are going to be happy and contented, as well as productive and effective. And from time to time, you're going to have to conduct progress and performance reviews and things like that. And if you get that wrong, you're going to alienate effective members of staff. You get that right, then you're developing, but you're developing. And so if it is necessary to meet up by Zoom or Teams or Skype or whatever, or if it is necessary to meet up socially distanced in a park, then that becomes a part of life. The fifth is about business processes. Now, organizations always take for granted that their business processes, the technology, the intranet, the infrastructure that underpins everything, are always going to be absolutely happy and assured. They take for granted that everything is secure. They take for granted connectivity assurance and speed of operations and all of that. And things go wrong now when none of those things can be assured. One of the things that has happened over the last 18 to 20 months is that the infrastructure providers have broadened and broadened and broadened the technology capacity so that everybody has as much connectivity as possible. It doesn't always work. Over the course of the past year, I've been teaching, as it were, not just in India, but in China and Singapore and Malaysia and Indonesia and Australia and New Zealand and Vancouver and places like that. And sometimes the connectivity works and sometimes it doesn't. Emerging and developing parts of the world have found that, oh yes, we've got to absolutely expand our broadband capacity, our infrastructure capacity, our utility capacity, if we are not going to have an adverse effect on the behavior and integration of our organization, and therefore on productivity and output. And all of these things have got to be worked and reworked, and all of these things are going to change the patterns of behavior, the organizational integrations with which we've been so used to in the past. The sixth of these changes is around the human resource management and staff management and development processes with which, again, we're all familiar. We have all learned how to recruit and select and onboard and things like that. We have all learned the importance and value of disciplinary and grievance procedures and performance management and all of those sorts of things. They're bad enough to manage when you can do everything face-to-face. When you've got to do everything online, it is very, very difficult. And you know, I've now got colleagues who joined the university in the last 6, 9, 12 months who I've never actually met. It's impossible to meet them because of the pandemic situation. You can't go out and about. You can't even necessarily even if you can get to a safe location, the transport networks are not safe to travel on because of the COVID. So, you know, unless you live just round the corner from someone, you're not actually going to meet them. Now, how can you manage getting effective staff and onboarding effective staff? How can you manage to discipline and set performance standards? How can you manage people's grievances and gripes in that kind of a situation? The answer is, it is very, very difficult. But the answer is, if you take an oppressive approach to people in those situations, you will almost necessarily fail. And while, none of us want recalcitrant or bad employees, what we do not want is to lose good staff as a result of a misunderstanding. Misunderstandings are bad enough face-to-face, and they are 10 times worse when you're getting those misunderstandings either through email or through a Skype call or through a badly worded message or something like that. So what you have to do is to restructure and rejig everything in these so that the standards are maintained, but so that you take full account of the environment in which we're all working. That should be the same too for staff sickness and absence and non-delivery tasks. Why did you not do this? Why were you off sick? How were you off sick? Can you prove that you were off sick? Here we are in a pandemic world where millions of people have lost their lives. You're asking people to account for a cold or a cough. You have to take a sensible view of this, and that, I would argue, is a fundamental shift of attitudes that companies and organizations have to make, so that they, of course, pick up on people who are performing badly, but make sure that they treat, just because we are in a pandemic world, it does not mean that the colds and coughs and broken arms and sore throats and everything else like that have not gone away. You have to look at it from that point of view. And only in such a way are you going to maintain productivity and output, and only in such a way are you going to maintain the organizational and leadership and staff and management development that every organization needs in whatever circumstances we find ourselves working. The seventh of these pandemic and post-pandemic changes is indeed the role and function of business premises. Having said that we're all now working in these ways, and having understood that we're all now working in these ways, what do you use business premises for? Well, of course, in some cases, there are essential work that's got to be carried out. Alongside that, you still have to recognize that organizations as business, economic and social and human entities have to be sustained. You cannot just shrink down your business premises to something that is operationally viable without recognizing the human needs and wants that go with that. Never to forget that organizations are human entities. Never to forget that just because we have got used to these patterns of organizational behavior that take place partially, at least, over the airwaves, when you do turn up to work, you want the opportunity to catch up with your friends, to catch up with your colleagues, to resolve problems, to resolve difficulties, to get to grips with organizational priorities in whatever context that might be required. So you have got to look at the social factors and aspects alongside the operational outputs and other operational demands that you are wholly and mainly concerned with. You have also got to provide some kind of means for the human factors of belonging and identity to be maintained and to be there for whenever people come in. If once upon a time people came in 5 days a week to work, now if they come in 5 days a month, 5 days a year even, then the human factors, the belonging, the identity, the psychological contract has still got to exist. The eighth of these brings us on to the eighth of the pandemic and post-pandemic changes that I would draw your attention to. Indeed, the role and function of business relationships. Identity and belonging, alienation and displacement, which is the converse of identity and belonging. You've got to have the means in place to make sure that when people do come into work, or when people do log into work, sign into work, that they feel that sense of identity and belonging that we all actually need as human beings, as well as in our professions and occupations. Right? And to fail to do that, again, is counterproductive. I think a lot of companies and organizations are thinking to themselves, how do we manage this situation in the wider context? And I'll give you two examples, one from technology services. On the outskirts of London, SAS and SAP have premises next door to each other. SAP have asked their staff whenever possible to come into work because they see that as being a key part of the identity and belonging. SAS next door to them have said you can work where you like. And they see that as a part of identity and belonging. So, to say that one attitude is right or one is wrong is wrong. What you've got to say is, this is the attitude that I feel is going to work for me. Similarly, in the financial district in London, we have Credit Suisse and Allianz who have taken, Barclays, who have taken two different attitudes. Credit Suisse have said to their staff, you can work where you like. The only time you'll need to come into the office is when we actually need you, and there will be operational reasons. Barclays have said that once as the pandemic passes through, we expect everybody to return to 5 days a week. Again, that is how they see this thing about managing not just the work, but about managing identity and belonging and avoiding alienation. Right, the ninth of these changes that I'll draw your attention to is sustainability. As we come out of the pandemic, there is a huge move afoot to make organizations into sustainable entities and not just economic entities. Now, that's fair enough, and it's something that I'm sure that we're all signed up to, and there are iconic and famous figures the world over saying that we must do this. The World Health Organization says that the next biggest pandemic is likely to be climate change and drought, and the problems that brings, above all, drought. So economic behavior has got to change. You can't change it overnight. You need a long-term perspective. Now, I can't speak for the organizations in India, but for the organizations in the UK and in the West, that is something that is alien to them. Companies and organizations in the West have always taken a short-term perspective. The few that are exceptions to that, of course, have gone on to be global icons. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Netflix, all the people like that have said, yeah, we'll take a long-term view of where our business is going. Others in the shorter term, certainly in the UK, in our retail sector, we have lost department stores, we have lost supermarkets, we have lost retail chains, we have lost furniture chains because they did not take the long-term perspective. They simply said, oh, Amazon are doing this better than us, threw up their hands, and they then went to the wall, they went bankrupt and so on. So what, excuse me, what you've got therefore is the need for the long-term perspective and the need for the collective behavioural demands have got to be addressed and managed and organised and instituted by company leaders and management. It is not, as I say, naturally intuitive. It is also the case that the pandemic world has brought about economic uncertainty, economic fissures and disruptions, and to ask people to take a long-term perspective where they're not sure how many orders they're going to have cancelled today, again, is a big jump. It is a big leap of faith. The companies and as I said earlier, the companies and organisations that manage this, they are the ones that have gone on to be capable of sustaining themselves. It is also, in sustainability, always essential to remember that this is about social, environmental, and economic. The three have all got to be satisfied. It is no use having a brilliant social enterprise if it does not make money. It is no use being carbon neutral if actually everybody hates working there. It is no use being vastly profitable on the other hand, you're paying out hand over fist because you're not meeting your social and environmental responsibilities. It's a fundamental shift of attitude on the part of leaders and managers. It is also a fundamental shift of attitude on the part of an awful lot of people in professional activities to actually take this position. That you can't just chop along. You have got to take account of where it is that you are leading the organisation and the wider impact that you're making. And the 10th of the items that I would draw your attention to is communication. Communication underpins everything else, and communication in organizations is a social activity as well as something that is economic and work driven. You have got to be able to provide people with the technology and the media and the organizational mechanisms that they need and that they depend on if you want them to work anywhere else but the organization premises. You have got to provide things like mobile phones, laptop computers, tablets, Kindles, and all of those kinds of things. It's, oh yes, but you're spoiling your staff. To provide people with a mobile phone, a laptop, a Kindle, and an iPad in the UK costs you about £1,500 as a one-off sale. The office space that I occupy in normal times costs about £1,500 a day to occupy. So even in central London, by providing people with technology, you're immediately making a save. You're cutting your, as it were, your fixed, that part of your fixed costs to 1/365th of what it is that you were otherwise paying out. You know, so look at it from the point of view, not that you provide, oh, everybody's got a mobile or everything like that. Look at it from the point of view that you're managing and developing the return on investment of this 65% of your working capital that you should always have at the center of your thinking processes. It is those kinds of things, it is that kind of an attitude that you need to be taking. It is also to make sure that you manage the content, frequency, and attitudes of the communications. If you're after somebody, then make it absolutely clear. Because, if you're after somebody because of bad performance, then make that clear. You know, but do bear in mind how communications come across. There's nothing wrong with managing people's bad performance politely. You don't have to shout at them just because you've got them on a mobile phone. So there are fundamental behavioral issues around company and organization communications that you also have to be aware of. Right, so those are the 10 things that I wanted to run through. One or two observations before we finish off, and then we'll open up the floor to questions. In the wider sense, COVID-19 is overwhelmingly a behavioral issue for companies and organizations. And at the core of all of this is how you get people how to work, where to work, when to work, and what is of value and to whom. You need to be clear about what's going to happen now and to have a view about what's going to happen afterwards, how you develop processes and patterns of behavior. Because managing and developing organizations is a process which is influenced and it's driven by COVID, and of course it's also constrained by COVID. So, you know, that's first of all, is never to lose sight of that. In the UK at the moment, we have got lobbies saying, yeah, we understand that this is a massive pandemic. We understand that we have 160,000 deaths from it. We understand that there are at least 500,000 people who have been adversely affected by having the disease on top of that, but we need to get back to work. And so you need to come into the office. And so you can wrap up in a diving suit or a space suit and come into the office. Does not work like that. It's something you've actually got to work in and around. It is a behavioral issue, and it is your commitment to that behavioral issue that will drive the future of companies and organizations. Key issues: technology, access to all, and universality of infrastructure, alongside the security and the integrity of the transactions that you make. And that should be workplace transactions, of course, as well as commercial transactions. It is also essential that you can connect with all of your stakeholders, your backers, suppliers, people in the supply chain, distribution chains, and all of those sorts of things, subcontractors. You need the same connectivity, and that again, if people don't have confidence in that connectivity, then they will start to lose faith in the organisation. The socio-technological issues of physical premises and their locations. If you're going to downsize your physical premises commitments, then make sure that you manage the social commitments. Make sure that if you do insist on people coming into work, that they've got good reason to. If they are a nurse, if they are a teacher, if they are work in a store, then of course they've got to come into work. But make sure that everybody else has got a good reason for coming in as well. Make sure that you look for this from the point of view of social identity, as I said just earlier, and make sure that you look at this from the point of view of making sure that if you do supervise people through IT, then make sure that they are not being oppressed by the IT processes. Right. And to make sure that you use all of this to identify and develop the attitudes and values that you need, the flexibility that you want, the responsiveness that you want, and to make sure that you embrace innovative and pioneering activities and ways of working, whatsoever they may be and wheresoever they may take place. Make sure that you enforce your own standards, and make sure that you know and understand that those standards of conduct and behaviour and performance are what you have designed. You should be clear about what the absolutes of right and wrong are, even when people don't turn up to work but work remotely or online. How you reinforce and enforce your standards, and how you make it absolutely clear what you will and will not tolerate and what you do and do not reward. Right? This applies to all individual and collective behaviour and is a major effect on performance and output and profitability. If you allow people to behave in their own ways, productivity will slip. If you allow productivity to slip, profitability will slip. If you've got the standards set and watertight, then everybody knows what they've signed up for, and everybody knows and understands what it is that they've got to do. Right. And so where it comes round to is the role of function of leadership and management is to do all of this. It is a major gap in expertise, as we said at the start. It is about making sure that you know and understand what you want in patterns of conduct and behaviour, setting and maintaining standards of conduct and behaviour, establishing fundamental context around standards and behaviour, and making sure that you use all of this to deliver sustainable, effective and profitable performance, and to deliver this 65% of return on investment of 65% of your working capital. It remains a gap in leadership and management knowledge. It remains something that we've all kind of studied in the past. The companies and organisations that, of course, that have embraced this have gone on to be very successful. We've now had to do it as the result of COVID. We've had to do it as the result of coming to new ways of working. We've had to do it and in developing new work patterns, new organisation forms and new organisation patterns of activities. And we've had to do it so that the social and psychological needs can be managed. Ladies and gentlemen, I will leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for listening, and I will take, of course, any questions from the floor? Anybody?
Thank you very much, sir, for this informative and valuable session. Now the floor is open. It's time for interaction. If you have any doubts or need any clarifications, please ask.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Professor Joe Peter, faculty from
Good
Department.
afternoon to you. Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I have a question for you. My question is, do you think that the organizations will increasingly become polarized between the high-paid knowledge executive and the people who are in the forefront?
I think it is possible, yes. And I think that, then becomes a problem, how you sort of manage that integration. I think that what we're all, first of all, we recognize that this is a problem, and so secondly, what do we want to do about it? Do we want this polarization? In which case, and some companies do. I mean, Amazon, for example, in different parts of the world, will treat its staff, very, very badly. In London, they treat their staff exceptionally well. But in some parts of the world, in parts of America, for example, they've got a reputation as being a bad employer. So yes, I think the first thing to do is to recognize this. The second thing to do is to decide that if we don't want it, then we have to actually, sort of address this polarization by making sure, as I said just now, that when people come into places of work, there is room for this social sort of interaction and social activity. And third of all, that there are proper interactions between managers and staff. There is nothing to stop you managing by walking about when that is possible and all masked up and with gel. There is nothing to stop you also managing by ringing around. And if managers can do that, and if supervisors can do that, then it becomes something that is at least a form of connectivity that we can have. It is also the case that as organization premises develop, people say, quite rightly, we need to reduce our office space or something like that. There's no reason to abolish it, and you can also always hold, if you've got an hour staff meeting, you can always hold a 3-hour meeting so that people can chew things over, or they can have a look at other problems, or they can have a look at something or other, things like that. So there are ways to get over this polarization as you describe it.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. A pleasure. Any others, ladies and gentlemen?
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Actually, my question is, during this pandemic time, actually, most of the companies are cutting salaries and perks of the employees. So they are not in a position to disperse the proper salary and other benefits to the employees. So it will definitely make a gap in the relationship. A soaring environment will be created. So what's your opinion regarding this? How the companies will be able to tide over this situation?
I think if you're cutting salaries, it is a very, very dangerous move. It's happened in this country. We've had what we called a furlough scheme, in which companies and organisations that haven't been able to open up have been able to take government money for I think it is £2,000 a month for each employee that's on furlough. Where the problem has come with cutting salaries is that you then promise, oh yes, it won't be long before you're back on your full salary, and then the furlough schemes get extended, or the salary cut gets extended, or things like that. I think if you're going to cut people's salaries, be very, very aware that if on the one hand you've got to do it, then it's got to be done. Provide the data so that people can see how honest you're being, and look like that. But if you're also going to be doing it, yeah, well, I'll cut the salaries just for 1 month, or I will ask you not to take a month's pay this month, or it is a very, very slippery and dangerous slope. The standards that I spoke about in the talk, you had this thing about setting your absolute standards, your integrity, and so on. Once you start cutting people's salaries, people will question your integrity. Even if you are doing it in order to make sure the business survives, people will question your integrity, and people will cease to trust you. Once you become known as a company or an organization that is doing that, also customers and clients will start to step away from you. Customers and clients will start to look elsewhere for the goods and services that you are providing. I'll give you an example of that, actually. There's Real Madrid Football Club. Real Madrid Football Club have actually had a very good season. It's been completely unacceptable to them because they didn't win anything, though they came second in 2 competitions, and the semi-finalist in a third. But they've had to cut their staff salaries. Even they have had to cut their staff salaries, and now they are looking for players that are not the sort of the Galacticos that they used to have. And this has been, people are now starting to drift away, and the guy who owns the club, who is a guy called Florent Perez, has said, people are turning away from our business model. So on the one hand, the clubs had to cut the salaries. On the other hand, it has destroyed what people perceive to be the integrity of the club.
Thank you, sir.
So that's a very long answer to you, Jose. Yes, I hope it's good.
Sir, I have one more question for you, if you permit me to ask.
Yes, indeed, sir. Yes.
Yeah. Sir, for India, maybe last 2 decades or so, we have seen a lot of things being outsourced.
Yes.
Till 2 decades back, it was something very new to India. But my apprehension, personally, I feel post-pandemic, the direct engagement of the employees with the company may be less, and things might be outsourced to a greater extent. Is there a possibility of this happening?
Yes, the short answer is yes, there is. Yes. And companies and organizations are going to start, sort of looking at these ways of doing things. Sometimes it is the right thing to do. Sometimes you're doing it because you make an easy cost saving. In our country, there is a very, very famous story of it was a fish food manufacturer, actually, that instead of taking its supplies from the local port in England up in Liverpool, where it was located, it outsourced its supplies to Cadiz in the south of Spain. Now, this was crazy because it took no account of the 2,000 miles, it took no account of the bad weather in the mid-Atlantic, took no account of all of those sorts of things. It's a fundamental lesson for anybody who ever seeks to outsource anything is, can you guarantee the quality and value and volume of service at the price reductions that you are going to seek? Managers start to think of themselves in, oh, no, I can cut this cost. They see only the cost cut. They don't see the relationship, the technology, the distance between oneself and the outsource or anything like that. At the university, I've got a colleague from Wrocław in Poland who, this is one of the emerging technology centers of the European Union. And this person has got phenomenal operation going on, but of course at the moment can't supply either infrastructure services or hardware services because the connectivity is not assurable. So, I'd say, yes, managers and organizations are going to look to outsource. The behavioral drives, cutting costs, are still just as strong, but actually, the behavioral restraints and actually the real world restraints should also be just as strong also, because a lot of these things are going to get more fraught than less.
Thank you, sir.
Any more from anybody? Okay, well, look, then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for having me along. It's a huge pleasure. Obviously, I wish that it had been possible to fly out to see you, and I'm quite sure that some of you wish, I wish it would have been possible to bus us all into London as well. But here we are, and using everything to the best of as what we possibly can. There is a slide deck that goes with the presentation. I have made available, there's a short book that also goes with the presentation, which I have made available to Mr. Anthony. And that those things should be distributed to you all. I'll also give my email contact, so that if any of you ever think that you would like to get hold of you at some time, then please email at any time or anything else like that. Should any of you ever come to London, should it ever be possible again, do please think of visiting University College London. We're still there and we're right in the centre, so we're a nice place to be. Most important of all, I wish you every success in the rest of your studies. Wish you every success with everything that you then go on to do. It's a wonderful world outside in the, when we do get out of this situation. And I wish you every success as you take it on into what is going to be your world. Thank you so much indeed for having me along.
Once again, thank you, sir, for answering our questions and for the great presentation. Now I invite Mr. Joe Peter, NAC Coordinator, BMCCA, to deliver the vote of thanks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mansa Miss. Reverend Father Jacob, our Executive Director, Father Sergio, our Assistant Executive Director, our Principal, Dr. M.L. Joseph, Head of the Department, Rajmohan sir, my dear faculty members, and very importantly, the students community. On behalf of Bharat Mata family, I am privileged to present vote of thanks. First and foremost, I thank the management and the principal for helping us to organize this wonderful webinar. I extend my gratitude to Professor Richard Pettinger, the chief guest and the resource person, for accepting the invitation and also giving a proper insight into the evolving things which are going to evolve post-pandemic. I believe sir has already almost touched each and every aspect of organizational behavior and also has used very powerful words of attitude, perception, and belief, which we all are sure would play a great role, especially attitude. He has stressed that there should be a changed approach towards attitude post-pandemic. Also, he has said that the organization should be cohesive and not divisive. He has talked about flexibility. If I count numerous things he has touched upon, I feel that he has touched almost everything in the little time which he had, and I believe has given a very good insight to our students of the changes which are likely to happen post pandemic. And he also stressed about the human power in an organization. Very rightly said, 65% of the human power of organization make ROI of the organization. So we are so proud of having you with us today and sharing this insight into this very relevant topic of organizational behavior in the changed world. I may use so, if I may use so. Thank you, sir, very much for gracing this occasion. Thank you once again.
Thank you to everybody. A massive honor for me also. The pleasure and the honor is all mine. Thank you so much indeed. Good luck.
Thank you so much.
See you again, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, and hope to have more and more interactions.
Hope you
Yes, indeed. And get hold of me at any time. Everything is possible to fix up.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So this concludes the webinar. Thank you all for attending this session. We hope you have learned and enjoyed this presentation. Thank you.